Shalom, shalom, everyone. I have you all muted, but if you can hear me, if you would wave your hand, that's very helpful. Sharona, could you say a few words just to check our microphones?
Can everybody hear me well enough and clear enough? That was a thumbs up. Thank you.
Yes, good. That's good. Okay, well, we have a lovely group today. We are so pleased to see you. I missed you. We don't get to see each other that often. But I'm glad that we can be together now. I hope you're all looking forward to our time with Sharona. For those of you who have been with us before, you know what to expect. It will be fascinating and interesting. And for those of you who are new to us in our tours, we welcome you. I was just looking back. This is the 11th tour that we have done with Sharona. And each one of them has been fascinating on its own. So I am going to allow Sharona to take over and begin the meeting here. Let me just add a few more people are still coming in, and we will let them in, I think. Okay, let me just do it like that. There you go, Sharona, please lead us down to Ein Gedi in the Judean desert. Thank you, and welcome to all.
Okay, so does everybody see the spotlight? Okay,
Yes, we
so
can.
today we are not only going on a hike, we're going on a journey, on a day trip. Usually less people actually sleep over at Ein Gedi, and most people sleep in Jerusalem and do the Ein Gedi Judean desert, maybe with Qumran, maybe with Masada, and a day trip going either on the way to Eilat or back and forth to Jerusalem. So that's what we're going to do today. And we're going to enjoy the technology and what Zoom has enabled us, because otherwise I would never, ever, ever dream of taking you to Ein Gedi in August. It is 40 plus centigrade there, even before global warming. It's just a place that you hike usually from November, December till about April, more or less. So now really sit back with your air conditioning and enjoy the imagination. So we're, as we said, we're going to begin in Jerusalem. We are now on the east side of Jerusalem, standing on Mount of Olives. And from the peak of Mount of Olives looking west, we see the old city of Jerusalem. We see the walls, we see Temple Mount. At almost the same point, if we look to the right, we will see the Augusta Victoria German Hospital. It's about 120 years old. Notice the tower. Looking to the other side, we see another very prominent tower, which is this is the tower of the Church of Ascension. So obviously in the New Testament, there's what to say about this. I want to relate to the olive grove around the Church of Ascension. Olives have been here for thousands of years. The name Mountain of Olives, Har HaZeitim in Hebrew, is a very ancient name. It goes back to at least the time of King David, if not before, when King David had to escape from the revolt led by his son Absalom. He had to just hastily leave the palace, which was next to Temple Mount that we saw before, go down to the Kidron Valley and flee away into the desert. Not the first time, as we will see later on. He was very familiar with the Judean desert. And we'll see the Judean desert is the place where people will have to escape from Jerusalem, from the inhabited area. This is the closest place to escape. So he goes up the Mount of Olives. Going a few steps forward to the edge of the crest, we can see that from the same spot, we see the end of the rainy land, this line of greenery, and beyond it, we already see the desert. Now, I took this picture in a hazy day, so you really have to imagine this darker area here is actually the northern edge of the Dead Sea. And the lighter area here are the mountains beyond the Dead Sea in Transjordan, the mountains of Moab and Ammon. So standing on the top of Mount of Olives, we see basically the whole width of the Judean desert and towards the other side. And a third tower that we see here, a modern 20th century, about less than 100 years old tower of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. So have these three towers in mind. Why do I begin my tour here? Wait a second, there's another slide which I forgot. Okay, once again, last peak towards east. We're standing on Mount of Olives. We're seeing the last slope where it rains, and then the desert begins. The last slope where it rains, and then the desert begins. Okay, and the town that we see here, just east of Jerusalem, is a town that is called today Ma'ale Adumim, the ascent of the Reds. And again, a biblical name. This was more or less where the road is today that we're going to take from Jerusalem towards Jericho, was the border between the tribe of Judea to the south of us and the tribe of Benjamin to the north. And we see the pass of Adumim. In Hebrew, Ma'ale Adumim, which is today the name of the town. Why red? Why Adumim? We'll see very, very shortly. Okay, why did I decide to begin our journey here? Because wherever you go in Israel, some places a little more, some places a little less, you are affected by, geographically, the Syrian-African rift. The largest crack, the longest crack on the face of the earth, from the Horn of Africa all the way to the border between Turkey and Syria, 6,000 and more kilometers. And of course, where we're going to be today, we're going to see it very dramatically in its peak. But everywhere in Israel, in the Galilee, in the Golan, in the Negev, you are affected by this. And it's amazing to see that this geological rift that happened millions of years ago sort of appears in the Bible, in the book of Zechariah. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, exactly where we are. And the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half of the mountain moving north and half moving south. Did Zechariah study about the movement of the plates? Did he study tectonics? Did he study geology? Apparently, yes. Look at these diagrams, okay? We in Israel are on a plate called Sinai plate. And the Syrian-African rift began at the very beginning in this line, forming the Suez. And then it took another angle going north up to Syria and Turkey. And this whole plate, the Arab plate, is relatively moving north, and the Sinai plate with Israel and Sinai are relatively moving south. And it's happening east of Jerusalem, exactly like the prophet Zechariah said. So we were standing here on the peak of the mountains of Judea, mountains of Jerusalem, and we see the great valley below us, and this side is going south, and this side is going north, exactly like the description. I love this phrase. And this is a very dramatic point, because standing in Jerusalem, we're about 700, almost 800 meters over sea level. I hope everybody understands the metric. And the Dead Sea is 400 below, which means within 30 kilometers, 20 miles, we have a change of elevation of 1,200 meters. That is a lot. That is very dramatic. And that is going to affect the weather, the climate, and then the history and everything beyond it because of this great crack on the face of the earth. By the way, it is still active. It is still moving. In the average rate of a centimeter a year, which is a lot geologically, and there are earthquakes all the time. And once every 100 years, there's a big one, and we're getting close to it. There's the previous one was 1927. The one before was 1837. So we are getting close to another big one. So we're going down from the Mountain of Olives. We're on our road next to Ma'ale Adumim. We're on the border between Benjamin and Judea. And just before we enter the desert, we turn our heads back to Jerusalem. Last glance of the city before we go into the wilderness. And we see the three towers: Mount Scopus Hebrew University, modern tower, Augusta Victoria, German hospital, and the Church of Ascension. Seeing these three towers, and they can be seen from a distance, from miles away, because they're on the crest of Jerusalem, symbolizes the closeness, the very, very tight relation between Jerusalem and its backyard desert. There are other cities that developed in the desert. If you look at all the capitals of Egypt along the years, the capitals of Mesopotamia, there's desert around them, but they're always next to a river. And Jerusalem, for David's reasons, which maybe perhaps in another tour we'll understand, places Jerusalem where there's no river. And that's almost the only capital of the ancient world that does not have a river. Look at all the capitals of Asia, of Europe. There's always a river in the middle. And not only not having a river, but having a desert as a backyard. We're making our way down. I took these photos in March when the weather was nice and we had a rainy winter. So the slopes were covered with fresh grass and greenery. And then the sheep and goats could come and graze. This is very, very timely. It holds a month, maybe 2 months, that's all. So if you come at the very right time, the hills around you are green as Switzerland. Come a week later, a month later, if there was a little heat wave, everything is yellow again, the way you expect the desert to be. And then there are reds. This is a special rock called in Hebrew Chat Rurim. It has a chet and two reish, which makes it impossible for my mother to say it. Being in Israel already almost 60 years, she cannot pronounce this word. Chat Rurim, you have a lot of iron in the rock here, and the iron became rusty, touching oxygen, touching water. And these red rocks are all along the road between Jerusalem and Jericho, and that is why it's the ascent of the Reds, Ma'ale Adumim, the pass of Adumim. All along the way, there are signs: 500 meters over sea level, 400 meters over sea level, 200 meters over sea level, and finally we get to sea level itself. And along the years, because so many tourists stopped here, endangering themselves and the traffic next to them, the Ministry of Tourism actually built an organized bay here with a tree and a nice big sign, sea level. Okay, from this point on, we are descending to a place where there are rare such places on earth. There are others, but they're not very frequent. So a Bedouin entrepreneur has placed his camel here for years already. Before Corona, this camel worked very hard, going down and up and going down and up and going down and taking photos and charging 10 shekels from each tourist. He's been quite unemployed for the last year and a half, this camel. So we share our unemployment. And after we've taken our picture, we're continuing down the road. I skipped over the Good Samaritans Inn because that's a whole story of its own. It needs a separate tour. Later on, I will be skipping Jericho and Qumran as well because we just can't do it all in one day. You know how it is. But through the windows of the bus, we can stop the bus for a moment at a bus station where we're safe, and looking through the windows of the bus, we can see on our right side this Muslim site with these white domes, and they call it Nebi Musa, the Nebi, a prophet, the tomb of the prophet Moses. Now, how can that be? If you look at the Bible tells us specifically, no one to this day knows where the grave of Moses is. And that is purposely. Like Mount Sinai, the Bible does not like Jerusalem, Temple Mount, to have any competition. There are no other holy sites in the pure Judaism of the biblical sense. Today, you have all the many holy sites in Israel and around, but initially, there should have been no competition to Jerusalem. So why is it that the Muslims believe that the tomb of Moses is here? There are a lot of explanations. And when you have a lot of explanation, it means that none of them is definite. One of the stories tell us about pilgrims who used to make their way from Jerusalem to Mount Nebo, the other side of the Jordan, where somewhere around in Mount Nebo, that is where Moses really died and was buried. And the way was too risky. Crossing the Jordan, climbing the other side on the mountains was too long and too risky, and too many people died on the way. And therefore, the Muslims of Jerusalem prayed to Muhammad and to Allah, make the way easier, make the way safer. We want to give our respect to Moses, who gave the world 10 commandments. Moses and many other heroes in the Bible are holy to the Islam as well. And what Muhammad did was bring the grave closer. That is one Muslim tradition. Another historical point of view is this building was built in the 13th century at the end of the Crusader period. And it's along the pilgrimage route, the Christian pilgrimage route from Jerusalem to Jericho. And they have an annual festival. And this annual festival happens to happen every year just at Easter. Now, they don't have the same calendar. They have a Muslim calendar, which is very unique. It's lunar, and most holidays move along our solar calendar, like their Hajj, their pilgrimage to Mecca. It moves sometimes winter, sometimes summer. But this holiday of Nebi Musa is always next to Easter. And that is geopolitics. That is to make sure that there's Muslim presence on the road when Christians are going up and down from Jericho to Jerusalem. Okay, we're going back on the road. And at a certain point, we are leaving the mountains, and suddenly the view opens up and we reach the valley. On our left side, we will see a big oasis and a big city. That is Jericho. And once again, I'm going to skip it because Jericho is a huge topic with 10,000 years of history, being supposedly one of the very first cities in human history. But one little phrase we will suggest here, because we will be seeing palm plantations along the way, all the way to Ein Gedi and at Ein Gedi itself. Right? Palms being a very, very important product in ancient Israel. It is the only fruit that is in the 4 species of Sukkot, of tabernacle, and the 7 species that we celebrate in Shavuot. It produced fruit and produced honey. You could use every part of the tree, the leaves, the flowers, the stem, everything can be used for 1,000 different uses. This is one of the most important trees in the economy of ancient Judea, to the point that the palm tree became the symbol of Judea, at least in the eyes of the Romans. When they minted the coin Judea Capta, Judea was taken captive in the Great Revolt after they destroyed the Second Temple. They put a palm tree in the middle, symbolizing Judea. So this is the city of palms is Jericho, and the valley of Jericho is the valley of palms, at least where there is water. Palms grow in the desert, they like the heat, but only in the oasis, only where there is water. They cannot grow just in the middle of the desert. On our way, we skipped Qumran, and we get to this point where there's a strange rock with a sign on top and another sign on the side. Now we have to very carefully stop, because you see there's no bay here. And we have to be very, very careful. And looking closer at the sign, we see that there's an inscription here. If we look even closer, we see that the letters PEF, Palestine Exploration Fund. And this has nothing to do with the Palestinian issue today, okay? The whole land of Israel was called during the 19th and beginning of 20th century Palestine. It was the county of Philistine in the Turkish Empire, and that name stayed during the British Mandate. At the end of the 19th century, in Britain, a body was organized to come and research the Holy Land. Scientifically, they had cartographers, they had archaeologists, they had botanists, geologists, zoologists, you name it. And that was the Palestine Exploration Fund. And a lot of the science that we have today about the geography of Israel begins from this fund. One of the things they did is go to identify biblical sites, go to Arab villages and cities that have a name that resembles a biblical name of a city, and see if it matches, see if the geography fits. And one of the things they did is measure the level of the Dead Sea. And they have reached this rock that we come today by bus or by car. They have reached this rock by boat, because the Dead Sea was all the way up here. And they marked the level. And that continued all the way till 1919. Now, in brackets that I can say that beyond all of the science, the excellent maps that they made were very, very useful for the British Army during World War I. So there was another issue here, maybe in the back of their minds. This rock was forgotten after 1919. We, the state of Israel, started paving this road in the 1970s. This part of Israel was until 1967 in Jordan. We got it during the 6-Day War, and we began paving the road in the 1970s. And this inscription was found while they were putting dynamite fingers inside, meaning to blow this rock up in order to pave the road. And then at the very last moment, a tour guide from the SPNI, Society for Protection of Nature in Israel, suddenly noticed this inscription. It says, stop, 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 stop. There's this historical evidence here. And they actually made another bend in the road in order to bypass this rock and keep it intact. And this is a reminder where the Dead Sea should be. We'll soon see how low it is today. So here's the Dead Sea. We're standing more or less on the level of today's road. This here is the beach, the way I remember it from childhood. This line, right below the road. This is where the Dead Sea is today. It is receding in a frightening pace. It is shrinking. It is disappearing. It will never disappear in total because it is so deep. There's 300 meters even below. The bottom of the Dead Sea is 700 below sea level. So somewhere at a certain point, there's going to be a new balance between the amount of water coming in and the amount of water evaporating. When the lake becomes small enough, the amount of evaporation would balance with the water coming in. So it will never totally disappear, but we're definitely losing a lot of our nature with this receding. And we hoped 2 years ago to become one of the natural wonders of the world, and which would bring more world attention into saving the Dead Sea. But unfortunately, we got to the eighth place. Now, in Hebrew, we do not call it the Dead Sea. Today, we also call it the Dead Sea. In the Bible, it's only known as the Salt Sea, Yam HaMelach. And whenever it's given another name, like in the Battle of Abraham with the 5 kings, it is called the Valley of Siddim. And the Bible itself explains, what's this name Siddim? That is the Dead Sea. But if you look at the Hebrew version, it doesn't say Dead Sea, it says Salt Sea. Same here. In this story here, the Bible says Sea of Arava, but that is the Salt Sea, or in the Hebrew English translation, Dead Sea. So there are several names, but in Hebrew, mostly it is the Salt Sea. It has 33% salt because this is a terminal sea. Water can go in, and the only way to go out is by evaporation. And what evaporates is distilled water with no minerals, no salt. So along the years, there's accumulation, and it's 10 times or even 11 times saltier than other oceans. That's why you can float. That's why it's so sterile. Nothing can live in it. And that is why it is the Dead Sea. Okay, so this has been our journey till now, from Jerusalem towards Jericho, and we took a right turn almost to the mid of the Dead Sea. Now, it's not exactly like this today because this whole section has dried out. It doesn't exist anymore. So the Dead Sea today ends more or less here. And the Judean desert is this section. It's a third of the territory of the Judean tribe. This is more or less the border between Judea and Benjamin. These are the Judean hills. These are the Judean lowlands. Judea had a very big territory. The eastern third is the desert, about 80 kilometers long, about 30 kilometers wide at the widest point. You can pass it within 1 day. And why would you like to pass it? Because along the shoreline here, there are sources of water. There are oases. And if you are alone with a small group of people, you can find enough water to survive in the desert. You can find caves to live in. An army cannot do so. An army cannot travel where there are no paved roads. It needs massive supplies of water. It needs massive camping sites. So that is why along history, many people escaped to the desert. The Bar Kokhba rebels, the people of Qumran, Elijah the prophet, and of course, David before he became king, as we will see shortly. Okay. So continuing our geology climate lesson, how come we have such a small desert? How come a desert is so close to the rainy area? So we have here a phenomena called desert in the shadow of the rain, or rain shadow. Now, I found this on Google. I've added this. This photo is from Sierra Nevada or somewhere else in the world where both sides of the mountain are on the same height. In our case, it is even more extreme because the Dead Sea is 400 meters below the Mediterranean, which is here. So the clouds come from the side of the ocean, in our case, the Mediterranean, with the western winds. And as the clouds climb up the mountain, they become colder, they condense, it rains. As they pass the peak where we stood in the beginning and start descending, the clouds, they become hotter, they evaporate, and there's no rain. So you can actually have a situation where you're standing here in the desert and you can see the clouds over Jerusalem, or the crest, the clouds over Bethlehem or Hebron, and you don't get any rain. What you do get is the flood, because if several drops of rain happen to fall just a bit over, they will create a flash flood. Now, one of the most dangerous things in Israel is hiking in the desert in the winter on rainy days, because what will happen, you will be standing under sunshine and you will not see neither wind nor rain, and the valley will be filled with water. This is a phenomenon that was known to people in the desert. In this case, we're talking about King Ahaziah, who was going to battle with the Moabites and the Edomites, and they reached a point that the army did not have enough to drink, and they asked the prophet, what shall we do? And this is the answer of the prophet: don't worry, tomorrow the valley will be filled with water. You will not see the rain, but the rain will come. So again, another geographical phenomenon that was very familiar to the people then. So we have reached the land of Ein Gedi. There are many places called Ein Gedi. There's a beach, there's a spa, there's a field school, a youth hostel, a nature reserve, a hotel, an ancient synagogue, okay? And all of this exists here because there is a spring. 4 springs, actually. One of them is the largest, is called the spring of Ein Gedi. And there's also the spring of David and the spring of Arugot and the spring of Shulamit. Without water, there would not be here life. It would be as barren as any other accidental point in the desert. Because of the spring, there's life from 3,000 years ago all the way to today. Let's look at it from a different point of view. This is from the Nature Reserve brochure. Okay, we actually have 2 riverbeds here: the Arugot riverbed, which is longer for good hikers, the David riverbed, which we're going to be visiting today. We've been on the bus for 1 hour and 40 minutes by now. Have you noticed? And the kibbutz and the ancient synagogue and the youth hostel and the field school, and all of this thanks to the main spring that is here. Now, we're going to first visit the synagogue, the ancient synagogue, and then go up to the David spring and back again. This is our hike for today. Okay, so beginning at the synagogue, we know that there was a settlement at Ein Gedi from biblical times, not from David. Definitely after David. Maybe from Solomon, maybe a little later. We'll see soon why we think perhaps it was Solomon. And this settlement continued into the Second Temple period. After we went to Babylon and come back, this place was profitable enough for people to make the effort and cross the desert and come and settle here in this very harsh place because it was worth it. And we'll soon discover why. Unfortunately, compared to the nature reserve, which is always full of visitors, Israelis love it. And when they're tourists, of course, sometimes even overjammed, the ancient synagogue is less visited. So the people sitting there are a little bored. They're very happy to have people visit them. And in between one visitor to another, they draw on the bathroom doors, they make mosaics, they make all kinds of, they cook. They unfortunately have plenty of time. So it looks beautiful. It's a really nice decorated place to come and visit. And as you pass the gate, one of the strangest plants you see here, and it's called the apple of Sodom. It's not mentioned in the Bible, an apple of Sodom, but it is very, very, very poisonous. It looks very tempting. Look at it in the middle of the desert, is lush green, big leaves, and this big green fruit. It's like two fists coming together, the size of it. And when you open it, it's almost hollow. There's air and there's fluff in there. And there's very little to eat. And if you eat it, it's deadly. And it fits the sinners of Sodom who were wicked, and that they would starve people. And then the only thing that they would let them have or offer them would be this horrible fruit. So that fits. So the board people of the staff of the synagogue have collected here some antiquities and have made some replicas of the mosaics that we will be seeing shortly. And they wrote this beautiful phrase from the Bible on the wall of the cashier and entrance, Eshkol hakofer dodili bekarmei Ein Gedi, which is the phrase that is written here, my beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossom from the vineyards of Ein Gedi. Now, because this is in the Song of Songs, and the Song of Song is attributed to King Solomon, so it's convincible that from Solomon and on, there has been settlement here. And this kofer in Hebrew, the henna, as it is known around the world, this is the botanical name, the Latin name of the plant, is worth a lot of money. People were willing to pay a lot for it in gold, in other metals, and other precious items. So it was worth it for the people of Ein Gedi to come here. And the kofer needs heat and a lot of water, tropical conditions. And that is why it grows here and other oases along the Dead Sea. And that is why people came to settle here. There's a model of what the place looked like during Second Temple period and later on during the Roman and Byzantine period. Now, we have to understand the people here made money from perfumes. The market for the perfumes was the Greco-Roman world, to the point that in the Roman period, if a soldier served in Judea, later on Palestina, he could not come home to his wife without a bottle of this perfume. In the Second Temple period, it wasn't kofer. It was a plant called afarsemon in Hebrew. It is not the orange tomato-like fruit that we call persimmon today. We don't really know what it is. There are several suggestions. We are not sure what it is. And you've labored a whole year. You produced one bottle. That bottle, the price of it will sustain you for the next year. Right? So the Romans had an interest in having the people of Ein Gedi there. to the point that in the Great Revolt, the Jews of Masada came and massacred the Jews of Ein Gedi. Jews fighting against each other, not only in 2021, it goes back many, many years. So the zealots of Masada did not like the people of Ein Gedi who cooperated with the Romans, who had economical ties with the Romans. They came and massacred them. The Romans resettled the place. They wanted the perfume. In the next revolt, in the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Romans actually guarded the vineyards and the plantations, making sure that nothing happens to them. So there was a big, rich village with streets, with many houses, with a village center, which we're on our way to. So we're making our way through the antiquities. We see pillars from the Roman period. We see grinding stones for flour and other spices, since I took these photos during March. So there's also blossom, and we're making our way towards the center of the ancient town. And as we get closer to the center, we see ritual baths, mikvaot, which we've seen already in at least 2 or 3 other tours that we took, Magdala, Tzipori, maybe more. And underneath this big tent, that's the center of attention. That's where we're going. There's this ancient synagogue, which means in Hebrew and in Greek, the word synagogue, a place of gathering, Beit Knesset in Hebrew, a place of community, place of being together, reading Torah, studying, not necessarily the place of prayer and ritual as we know it today. It developed into it later on. So this is from the 3rd century, when it's already a place of prayer. And you see this beautiful mosaic floor with geometrical designs and all kinds of birds. Let's go closer. We see the birds more closely. We see where the staff of the site today take their inspiration from. We see this little menorah, 7-armed candelabra. And on the side, this is the main carpet. This was done by a professional. On the side, the locals who were less professional, okay, simpler geometrical forms, and this long inscription, okay? And what do we have here? We have here the history of humanity, from Adam through his sons and all the way the lineage, the dynasty. We have here in the middle, instead of a zodiac, we have the words of the signs, okay? The 12 first words are the names of the signs. This is Taurus, this is twins, this is Cancer, etc., etc. And then we have the names of the Hebrew months, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, etc., etc. This is instead of having a picture of a zodiac, as we know from other synagogues in Israel, like Tzipori. And here, this is the most interesting part. There are blessings, people who should be remembered in favor, and there's a curse. Cursed are the people who will tell the secret of the city. Raz Dekaria, that's in Aramaic. Sod HaKirya in Hebrew. Raz Dekaria, this is written over here. Whoever will tell the secret of what? We're not sure, but most researchers believe the secret of the production of the perfume. And we know secrets of production of perfume till today are, you know, ask Chanel or all the others. And this is quite unique. So this secret of how to produce this very expensive, very luxurious, very rare, this is the livelihood of the city. So what happened to them? Why did they disappear? When did they disappear? Let's go to a shady spot, enjoy the view. And understand, like many, many other parts in Israel, after the Arab conquest in the beginning of the 7th century, the roads were not as safe. As we said before, the Roman army and later on the Byzantine, which are culturally the continuation of the Roman Empire, guarded the roads. They had an interest to make sure that the perfume from here and other products from all over Israel reach the port of Gaza or the port of Caesarea. The Muslims didn't care that much. And if you would be robbed along the way, you lost your income of the year. You lost that one bottle of perfume. So you can bear it for 1 year, the second year, maybe a third. At the end, if you don't make the money, why live in such a harsh location? Right? So the place was abandoned in the 7th century after the Muslim conquest, not because there was a massacre, not because they were driven out or exiled, the pure economical reasons, and only settled again in the 20th century. In 1953, the IDF, the Israeli army, built here what is called in Hebrew He'achzut. This word does not have translation, I think, to any other language because it is something unique. It is a proto-settlement settled by soldiers meant to become a civilian settlement one day in the future. And there's an army unit called Nachal that, at least in the 50s and maybe all the way to the 70s or 80s, created new settlements in Israel and then left them as an army and let civilians go in. So one of the very first He'achzut army settlement was here at Ein Gedi in 1953. Now, the way they did to get here was much harder than what we did, because the whole way from Jerusalem to Ein Gedi did not belong to us. It was in Jordan. They had to go all the way around through Arad, much longer, harder, unpaved way. And they built these first buildings. Think about it. No air conditioning, no shade, no trees. Wow. But they stuck to the place. And eventually the civilians came, settled in these houses, and shortly afterwards moved to where the kibbutz is today, about 1 kilometer to the south, in a better location. And we'll see at the very end what the kibbutz looks like today, very different than what we see here. The abandoned buildings were later on used at the very end of the 1950s. I'm not sure whether this is an 8 or a 9, to build the first field school of the SPNI, Society for Protection of Nature in Israel. So this is a very, very pioneering location. We're going to leave this site, and since I did this in March and you are now sitting in an air conditioning, again, never in August, we will take a stroll to the nature reserve along this path that was paved especially for us. It's maybe a half a mile, and we're walking along the plantations. And let's give you a bit of a taste of what it is along this path. You see it's shady in parts. And oop, what is that? Let's get closer. He's not afraid. He's used to people, for good or bad. What is this creature? We'll get back to it later, to this little creature. We'll see it up close. Okay, and we're continuing in the path. They built benches to rest in the shade, explanations about the kibbutz, about the army base, about the palms. Finally, wow, we reached the nature reserve. And on the entrance, we see all the potential. Could you excuse me for one split second? There's somebody at the door. We shouldn't be. I'm back, sorry. All the animals that we can potentially see in the nature reserve, the truth is 90% of them we're not going to see. A lot of them have the common sense to be nocturnal. 40 degrees outside, you're active at night. Those who are active at day are usually there at dawn and at dusk. And only us stupid human beings are there when the nature reserve is open from 8 to 4. So the animals are much smarter than us. The animals that we do have a chance to see are the hyrax, which we just saw in the path, and the ibex, the wild goat. Seeing a leopard, it's like winning the lottery. Not going to happen. With all my years of traveling, and I've been a lot in Ein Gedi, I have not seen a leopard. Okay. Why is this nature reserve so unique? Because it has plants from 4 different families. You have plants that love the desert. You have plants that love the combination between the heat and the water, tropical conditions. So all these plants here come from Sudan, come from tropical, from the savanna, from subtropical Africa. They migrated with the birds along the Syrian African rift. Notice that the first few hundred of meters, about the first half mile, is paved. So handicaps and people who find it difficult walking can reach the first pool and the first waterfall. We also have here plants like reeds that grow anywhere in the world that there's water. Notice the drastic contrast between where there is water and life and plants, and a meter away, it's totally desolate, totally dry and arid. So this contrast and this combination that you don't find in anywhere else in the world, water plants, desert plants, tropical plants, and also because it's been isolated, oases are like islands. They have their own evolution. They're also plants and animals that are endemic to Ein Gedi. And that is true, by the way, to every oasis in the desert. And each spring, 10 kilometers north of Ein Gedi, 20 kilometers south of Ein Gedi, has its own endemic species. Now, the large animals, the wolves, the coyotes, the leopards, of the birds can go from one source of water to the other. The beetles, the bugs, the lizards, the tiny animals stay in one oasis, and that's why they have their own evolution, and they become unique. Okay. So this is a plant that comes from Persia, Salvadora parsit in Hebrew. It has the chemical dentin in it, which is good for our teeth. So like many people before me in history, I am brushing my teeth with the branch, keeping my mouth oral hygiene. These are leaves of a squill, chatzav in Hebrew. It's actually blooming now at the end of August, but in March when I took the picture, it had the leaves. So that's a Mediterranean plant. And after we've reached the first waterfall, we leave the handicap pave and we begin climbing up. There's no way around it. This is considered an easy hike, but once again, it's only easy when the temperature is normal. So we're making our way up, and some of the birds that we see, this is a kind of a desert swift. In Hebrew, they're called tristramit. Henry Baker Tristram was a zoologist from the PF, the Palestine Exploration Fund. He discovered these birds in Jericho. They were very, very rare at his time. Today, they are very, very common because these birds eat fruit. And as the state of Israel and settlements like Ein Gedi and nature reserves and places like Masada planted more and more and more palm trees and other fruit trees, these birds have more and more what to eat, and they're very, very common. Notice the very slight change in color. This one is a little darker and shinier. So this is the male, and this is the female. They look totally black when they're standing. When they're flying, there's a orange feather just below their wing. And we're continuing our way up. We can hear constantly water from the rapids. We constantly see the contrast between where water flows and the sides when there's no life. And obviously, even in March, it was hot enough to go into the water. And this is the time to ask, while our feet are in the water, where does the water come from if it doesn't rain? So sit comfortably. You can put your whole body in the water. You can put your back underneath the rapids so to get a little massage. And now we're going to continue our geology lesson. We mentioned before, the rain is only on the western slope. The eastern slope doesn't get any rain, but the topographical water dividing line is not equal to the geological one. Now we have to imagine here, the mountain used to be once like this. Follow my marker. The mountain used to be higher like this. All of this part was eroded off because this section has more rain. So it's now all alluvium somewhere in the Mediterranean. And because this was taken off, there was a drift in the water dividing line. So water that falls here, rain that falls here on the western side topographically, geologically goes east. And it comes out in springs in the area of Ein Gedi and few more sites along the shores of the Dead Sea. That's how we get the water. It takes the water about 10 years to flow through. So the level of the water stays more or less the same all year round and along the years. It's not that if it's a rainy year, we will have more flow or a drought, we will have less. It's more or less stable because it equalizes underground. We are enjoying the water. That vegetation is sometimes so dense, it creates a tunnel. Going through the tunnel of plants, you almost need a flashlight. So the whole bottom is, your feet are in the water, nice and cool and dark. And we're almost at the end of the hike. We're very close to the David waterfall. This is a photo that was taken in a former visit. This is my son. Those of you who remember him from Megiddo when he was young and cute. So this is already in his teenage. This was taken a year ago. And now, with the water coming from above, this beautiful spot, this heaven on earth, this is the time to find a very comfortable rock. Once again, if you can put your feet on the water. And this is time for our Bible lesson. And we're all opening the book of Samuel. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En Gedi. We're going in the middle of the story. Shaul, King Saul, is very envious. He is very angry at King David. He realizes that King David is competition, and he is beginning to look for him in order to kill him. So David goes from his natural area that is between Hebron and Bethlehem to the nearest desert, to the nearest place in the desert where he can live. So at that time, there are no settlements here, because if there was a settlement, they would give him to the government. He was there as a fugitive. And after Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, and he's told David is in Gedi, so he takes a unit of strong people who can go through the desert, and he's looking for David in the crags of the wild goats, in the place where, that's how you identify the place. That is the characteristic of a place, the crags of the wild goats. There are no settlements here yet, no people, right? And he comes to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. And David and his men were in the inner side of the cave. They're in the darkness. He's in the beginning of the cave where he can be seen because sunshine comes in. You should just know, I couldn't take a good picture, but here there is a cave. So that's why we're here. And the men say to David, this is your time. This is your opportunity. His army is outside. He's here on his own. He has no protection, maybe even doesn't have his weapon on him because he went to relieve himself. This is your chance. Take it. Kill him now. But David doesn't do so. David crept up unnoticed, and cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And that's not the end of the story. Because after Shaul leaves the cave, David goes after him. And looks how he calls him. My lord the king. He's totally loyal. He is totally as a servant. He's totally not as a rebel. Why do you listen to the men who say David has been harming you? This day you have seen in your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. I could have killed you, and I didn't. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I will not lay my hands on the Lord because he is the Lord's anointed. I respect you, and more than that, I respect God. You were chosen by God. I cannot argue with the choice of God. Yeah, I could have killed you. I have to move you guys aside in order to read the phrase. Just a second. Why are you hunting me? Okay, may the Lord be the judge between us. Okay, against who are you? Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Who are you pursuing? A dead dog, a flea. Imagine King David saying that upon himself. He is one of the less humble people in the Bible. He is a guy who knows what he wants for himself. He puts a target and he knows he can get it. And saying about himself that he is a dead dog, a flea, this is a very unique situation for him. And Shaul says, in a very unique situation for Shaul, you are more righteous than I. This is a moment of sanity, a moment that his madness leaves him, that his sense of being pursued leaves him, his mania leaves him, and he sees David as the person he is, and he realizes what a good person David is. And he even has a little bit of a prophecy. I know that you will surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. So he says the reason why he pursued David to begin with, because he knows that David will be king, but the tone is different, I can imagine. Not with anger, not with fear, but with realization. And this is something that you can imagine in this magical atmosphere in the middle of the desert, but you have all this water coming down, and the noise of the water, and the birds singing around, and maybe an ibex. And this is a magical moment for these two very, very hard people, David and Shaul. And Shaul leaves, and they separate. I don't know if it was friends, but they separate. And then a chapter or two later, the mania goes back into Shaul, and he keeps pursuing David, and he has to run away to the Philistines, and the story goes on. But this was a magical moment. We're beginning our way back. We've reached the deepest point. We crossed the waterline, and we're making our way back, and we're finding animals on the way. So this is the wild goat, the animal that the whole area is named after. Gedi in Hebrew is a goat. So this is the spring of the goats, Ein Gedi. Now these are females, and this is a male. You can see that the fur is darker. There's also like a black zipper along the back, and you see the beard. You see the big horns. And once a year, around November, the mature male, they go into the heat season. They're horny. They forget to eat. They're thinking about one thing, they forget to eat. And during this time, the horn develops a little less. So there are narrow rings on the horn. So if you get close to an ibex, you can count the rings and you know how many mating seasons he passed. And then you add 3 and you know the age of that, that male. During the mating season, they also go around with their tongue out all the time. Why tongue out? Because they smell not through their nose. They smell through an organ called the Jacobson organ, which is here. And then it's on the top of their palate. So they gather molecules in their tongue and then move the tongue to the top of the palate. And that's how they know whether or not the female is ready. The mating itself always happens at night. We know that today because we have ultraviolet and we have all kinds of candid cameras. Giving birth also happens at night. So think about in biblical times, they would see the mating. They would see the horny males, but they would not see the mating act itself. They would see the males fighting for the female, but they would not see the mating itself, and they would not see birth because it was dark. They didn't have any electricity. So once again, the familiarity of the people who wrote different phrases of the Bible with the desert comes here. This is a very true zoologically phrase. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? No, you cannot know because it's always at night. And here's the creature we saw before. In Hebrew, it's called shafan. Maybe this is the source of the name for Spain. Maybe it was called in Hebrew and Phoenician, another Semite language, Shfanim, the island of the Shfanim, Shafan, Hispania. And this Shafan, it's not a rabbit. It's not many other things you're thinking about. Its closest relative in the mammal family is the elephant. Now you're saying she's going crazy. No, it's as close to the elephant as we are to a porcupine. But between us and the porcupine, zoologically, there are apes and many other animals. There are many creatures between. Between the hyrax, the shafan, and the elephant, there's nothing. So it's the same distance, but there's nothing in the middle. So that's the closest. How do we know that it's close to the elephant? 2 things. One is something in the digestion system, which I can't explain. The other is the teeth. The front teeth went sideways and long. If you know elephants, you know that they don't have teeth in front. They have the 2 tusks and they have teeth on the sides. And the elephant has to go like this, like Bugs Bunny, in order to chew something. So is the hyrax. They don't have teeth in front, on the side, and they always chew from one side to the other, and they have to go like this in order to cut something. Yeah? They live in herds. They have a female usually at the head of the herd, and they are the creatures that you will most likely see in Ein Gedi. There are many of them, and they're used to people. This is a creature of my imagination. Can any of you see it? It's a rock. Can you see a dinosaur or a lizard? This is the back. This is the head. Here's the eye. This is the nostril. And this is the tongue. Or am I seeing this because I'm walking in the sun too much and I have a heat stroke? I'm curious. Later on when we talk, tell me if you saw any of this. Let's look at other rocks on the way. Okay, so we're making our way down and we're looking at rocks. Look at this. geologically, this is called conglomerate. We know the word conglomerate mostly from business and from factories, et cetera, et cetera. It's many different pieces put together. So the word comes from geology, okay? Many rocks, pebbles that were cemented together in a flood. Look over here, we see funny shapes. Let's look a little closer here. This is a rock that was sedimented next to the water where reeds were growing, where bamboo shoots were growing, and the rock sedimented around the shoots. Later on, the vegetation decayed, disappeared, and these hollows show us where the roots and the bamboos used to be. And this is a phenomenon you see a lot where the water shifts from one place to another, which happens in a flood. Here's another beautiful plant that grows in the desert. In Hebrew, it's called salaf, which means a sniper. And you know it as caper. The capers that we eat in the salad that are quite expensive are the buds. They're not the fruit. They're the flower before it opens. Notice the spikes that grow in one direction. So in ancient times, if you had bleach, God forbid, in your throat, you can put in into your mouth, through your throat, a branch of salaf, of caper. It would slide down, and then on the way back up, it would grab the leech and take it out. This is what the flowers looks like in the prime of its bloom, and when it decays, and this is already the fruit of the caper, not edible anymore. And we're making our way out, and now we have our face towards the Dead Sea. And if it's already evening and the sun is to our west and we're looking east, we can see now more clearly the mountains of Moab. Who is Moab? Moab is both the son and the grandson of Lot. Lot and his daughters and his wife escaped from Sodom when God wanted to destroy Sodom because the people were evil and cruel. And the wife looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. And Lot and his two daughters, who don't have a name, escaped to a cave on the other side of the Dead Sea. And they are sure that they are the only people who survived in the world. One father, two daughters. And the daughters are determined to begin humanity again. And they give Lot a lot of wine to drink, and they basically rape him or steal semen, whatever you want to call it. And each of them has a son. And the son of the eldest daughter is Moab. She doesn't even hide the history of him. He lives all his life knowing that he is from father, Me'av, from father. And the Moabite people will develop from him. Looking historically, obviously, a long time, this sin has been forgiven, because from the Moabites, you will later on, generations down the line, you will have Ruth, who will cross back to the land of Judea and become the great grandmother of King David. So a cycle is closed here. We're almost there. I just can't stop taking pictures, even though I have 1,000 pictures, the same from the last 50 years that I've been traveling there. I can't stop. And we finally leave the nature reserve, and we take a very short visit, very short peek into the kibbutz of today. Kibbutz Ein Gedi is the only settlement in the world that the whole settlement is recognized as a botanical garden. It's not that they have a botanical garden. They live, all the houses, the dining hall, the clinic, the school, the hotel, everything, every plant has a little sign on it with the common name, the Latin name, the geography, whatever details you have in a botanical garden. Now, because they bring up water And because they have the heat, they can bring a lot of desert plants like these cactuses and tropical plants like this enormous ficus that comes from India. And the most famous tree is the baobab tree. They have several of them around the kibbutz. And this is just at the edge of, you can travel hours. And once again, look at the contrast. This is Mount Jesse, in Hebrew, Har Yishai, the mountain above the David River, which we just traveled, is named after his father, David, the son of Jesse, the son of Yishai. And that is more or less, folks. And I would like to farewell this time from one of my most favorite phrases in the Bible, from Jeremiah. Thank you for your grace of listening, for your youth, for your bridal love and following through the desert in the land not sown. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The end. Stop share. And now I would really like to know how many people saw the dragon. Can you raise your hand if you saw it? Thank you. Reynard, you saw it. And Gladys and Christopher and Molly, thank you. So everybody's heat stroking here. L'chaim.
So folks, I have, if you would like to ask Sharona a question, you may go ahead and unmute your microphone. And if you have any questions that you would like to ask her. What a beautiful tour, Sharona. Thank you so much. It truly is a magical place, the way you presented it. I've been to Ein Gedi number of times and walked up through there, never saw it in the way that you presented it. It truly is a magical place, a special place that I've gained a great appreciation for that I never had before. Thank you so much. If anyone would like to ask a question, and I do hope that this is giving you all an appetite to come to Israel and maybe join a tour with Sharona once the country opens up, hopefully soon.
And temperatures down.
As she suggested, we will not go in the summer, but we will go in a more humane and sane time of the year. But boy, it gives me an appetite to go.
I see Verena is raising her hand.
Yes, please. If you have a question, go ahead. Open your mic and
Unmute yourself, or and
who's that?
Verena is raising her hand.
I don't see.
Oh, maybe
Okay.
not. Okay.
Okay. Well,
Can I ask, please, how do you
Liz.
get?
Yes, please.
How do you get to the synagogue when you drive to Ein Gedi? I know how to get to the nature reserve, but I'm missing the synagogue.
You drive 3 more minutes on the same road, and you'll see the sign. It's right there. As you saw, I took the pedestrian path to go back to the nature reserve. It's just a few hundred meters away from each other. Very easy to find. Very easy.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, people are still joining us. Sometimes people don't come on time. Yeah, hi, Dan. Would you like to ask a question, sir?
Yes. Did you ever go into that cave?
It's not that deep. It might have been deeper in ancient times. To tell you the truth, I can tell the story. I can open the Bible. Every place where there's a dimple in the rock at the Ein Gedi Nature Reserve, we do not know the exact place that it happened. And there are other caves. I've told this at the Arugot, the other river. There's a second river. I told it below the waterfall. I told it above the waterfall. You can place it wherever it's comfortable for you. So specifically that cave over there is a few meters deep. If it did happen there, the cave has changed in the years, maybe because of collapsing or earthquakes, so. It's not really, it's not deep enough at the moment to imagine David's people in the depth.
You know, there was a point where the scripture, I think, said that Saul came down with an army of 3,000.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned at the beginning how difficult it was to get down there with an army. How do you reconcile that?
Well, first of all, it says specifically that there were the best of his army.
Okay.
Not everybody can pass the desert. There were roads. There are roads from Arad, okay, for instance. The same road that we take today is based on an ancient route because the geology allows. People used the Dead Sea for several things. They had to reach the Dead Sea, A, for salt, which was a very expensive commodity in ancient times. It preserved food. We know that in the Roman period, they paid soldiers with sacks of salt instead of gold. So that's why salt, salary, and soldier, they all come from the same Latin root. We know they used asphalt from the Dead Sea. It used to be, it doesn't exist anymore, that the Dead Sea would burp up masses of asphalt and they would be sold mostly to Egypt and they would be used to line boats. So people had to get to the Dead Sea area. Saul probably equipped his people with a lot of water and a lot of food, and there were the best of his army.
He was determined.
And he didn't mean to spend there a long time.
Right.
He was told David had good espionage. He got to En Gedi. He was going to strike and go back. He wasn't going to go to a big fight.
Well, yeah, I just want to point out maybe one last thing here. Very close to the beginning, you talked about the what do you call the rifts?
The Syrian African rift.
The rift and the moving of the plates and the 100-year time before earthquakes. And if I understood you correctly, the last earthquake was in 1927, I think you said, and the one before that was in 1820 something.
90 years previous.
90 years previously.
Was a big one.
So my goodness, I mean, according to those calculations, if I understood you correctly, and this is what the geologists, scientists, and the scientists would be saying, is that right, Sharona, that we're very close to a significant earthquake in this area, if I understood what you were saying.
Yes, in the next decade or two, most probably. I can't guarantee, but looking
No, I understand.
1,000 years back that we have records, on average, more or less, every
1,000 years back, an average, my goodness. Folks, you know, when you said that, kind of a shiver went up my back, to be honest with you. That is something that, you know, we don't pay an awful lot of attention to over here. Of course, we're busy with so many things that we have to take care of. But dear oh me, that's something to be thinking about. I would imagine that our people here, you know, our politicians and our religious people should be more aware of that. I have not heard anything. I think I've inspired. I think I'm going to do an article about this, Sharona, and I might you know, get back to you to get some more information, because I think people need to hear more about this.
I'll refer you to my brother, who is a professor of
Wonderful.
geology, and he's
Wow.
the head of the geological.
That would be fantastic. I would like to interview him on an article about this. I think it needs to, you know, it needs to be heard more. Yeah. Anyway, I see a hand over here, Dawn and Angela Svensson. Yes, please go ahead if you have something to contribute.
Sharona, I wonder if you could this very well be from the Zechariah text, the Messiah will stand at a Mount of Olives, and then the earthquake will happen. Is that biblical prophecy potentially going to be fulfilled when this great big rift would happen? What would you think about that?
Well, they must have come in late, Sharona, as quite a few did, but she addressed that specifically. Go ahead, Sharona, just very briefly.
I can answer a lot of questions. When it really, really comes into faith and theology, I leave my comfort zone there. Once again, I am telling you the truth. I am a non-believer. So
Yeah, but Sharona, but you said at the beginning, maybe I misunderstood their question, but you showed us how right on the Mount of Olives was this breaking place where it says that it's going to be split, the Mount of Olives, and it's
Yeah.
right there. These plates are right there. I think that's what he was referring to, if I'm not mistaken.
I took the Mount of Olives in the broader sense of the mountain, which is east of Jerusalem. Before the Syrian African rift, there was the mountain continued from where Jerusalem is today to Amman. There was no valley in the middle. So you can take that as a wider thing. The whole mountain that was east of Jerusalem split into two, and the valley was formed in the
Which
middle.
is the Mount of Olives.
And standing on the mount, but it's not only at that point, it's the whole 6,000 kilometers.
I
Okay,
understand.
Zechariah refers to that point in Jerusalem, and he would be standing on the Mount of Olives, and he can see it. Because I stood on the Mount of Olives and I saw all the way down to the valley and up the mountains on the other side. There
Right.
aren't too many places where you can see the whole width like that.
And the folks that you asked the question, the Svensson family, did you hear when Sharona was kind of towards the beginning of her lecture that she talked about these Teutonic plates, are they called, I think?
Yes, yeah,
And how they're shifting. Yeah, because I think that she
We've been
related that to Zechariah's prophecy back then. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, very fascinating.
It's
Yeah.
called the Syrian African Rift.
Right, thank you.
6,000 kilometers long.
Syrian African rift, right, yeah.
Thank
Great.
you, Sharona. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and the pictures were phenomenal, Sharona, really, great job. My
I enjoy
goodness.
doing it.
No,
I
I've
really-
never seen Ein Gedi quite like that. It was great. I was probably just too hot and sweaty to even, have the strength to look around, but
Probably.
that was great. Thank you so much. Okay, folks. Yeah, we're gonna, did you, Angela Svensson, did you have a brief comment?
I do. I just wanted to ask the question, through Israel Today's app, I seem to remember that people actually were washed away in the winter when you explained to us about the dryness and the valley and sudden.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, has that happened this past year?
It
When did that
did.
happen?
Sharona, help me out. I think it was 2 years ago that there was a real tragedy
Yeah,
down there. It was even a school group, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, you're right.
Had gone down there, and that's exactly what happens. It's very dangerous because you're just not aware of it. Like Sharona pointed out, you do not see the weather changing when you're down there. It's beautiful, sunny, blue skies, hot, and then suddenly, in a moment, it comes a flash flood. I lived in the Sinai Desert for a long time, and we had the exact same thing, just without notice. And then you would hear a roar all of a sudden coming from the mountains. And it was just completely surprising. There was no sign of any rain or any storm or anything like that. And boom, these floods would come down and just wash away entire Bedouin villages without warning. So it's a very dangerous situation like that. And yeah, many of Israelis have gotten caught in that. They get their, four-wheel drive Jeeps stuck down there a lot of times, and people have been, seriously injured and died in these floods. It's not uncommon.
The forecast in the winter includes a section of danger of floods. used.
Right, they always say that on the news.
Okay, and they repeat it again and again and again in all media, and they put
But
signs
people-
at the entrances of nature reserves, and they warn people as much as possible, beware of floods. It's a known thing, and yet
Yeah,
people ignore the warnings.
very often, yeah.
Ellen, hi Ellen.
Hi. I just wanted to say that, as a matter of fact, if you drive down south of Beersheba, you'll see the road markings. If there's a dip in the road, it's
Right.
marked how deep it is, 3 meters deep, 2 meters deep. So you just don't go there if the rains
Right,
start.
yeah.
I mean, you know how, technically, you know, but people sometimes just ignore the warnings.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, but Schreiber, Mr. Schreiber Schultz, did you have your hand up? Would you like to- Please.
I think it was 2 years ago, and 9 women, 17 years old, they died. They were in a
Yeah.
preparation group for the IDF, and 1 man, and it was really very, very.
It was a
The whole
tragedy.
country we mourned about it because
Yes,
they were
yes.
warned, and they didn't hear.
They were
It was
warned,
really,
yeah.
really very.
Yeah, it's
It
very
was
difficult because
very-
you don't see it. There's no sign of it, and it just comes like that in a
But
moment.
it wasn't at Ein Gedi.
No.
At Ein Gedi, relatively, there are
Fewer.
fewer floods, although along the years, many times the bridge that goes over the Arugot Valley, the road, was disconnected by the flood. And
Just washed
several
away.
times during the last 70 years, Kibbutz Ein Gedi was disconnected because the flood just took the road away.
Right,
Mhm.
right. Yeah.
Okay,
Very
guys,
good. Okay.
we will
Okay,
meet
so
you again in a few weeks,
we bid you adieu. Yes.
somewhere else in Israel. Okay,
We will-
hopefully by then they'll
we'll let
allow
you know.
tourists to come in.
Thank you all for joining us.
Good night.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.